I'll ask you to go with me to the book of Psalms. Psalms 11, verse 3. And it says, when the foundations are being destroyed, what can the righteous do? That's a wonderful question to ask ourselves. When the foundations are being destroyed, what can the righteous do? And there are many, many ways we could approach this particular scripture. But before I go into any sharing, I want to just share my very first encounter with God on this continent, on the soil of America. It was about 8 years ago when I first came to America. The Lord had spoken to me earlier to prepare myself for what He was going to send me to Israel and to Europe. And I spent many weeks, actually months, praying with the intercessors in Uganda, spending many hours just interceding for these two lands. But just a month before I came, the Spirit of the Lord said to me, work on getting an American visa because I'm going to send you to America on this very trip. And I'll not go into all the details, but with time I found myself in America, and I was in Chicago. And I registered for a conference that was in Chicago to do this prayer and spiritual warfare. And then I was to visit some friends who had come down to Uganda, who were in Oklahoma. And I didn't know why God was sending me to America. He had given me a very clear prophetic word for Europe and for Israel, and had promised me that on that particular trip, every nation where He's going to take me is going to give me a word for that nation. So I asked the Lord about the word for America, and He simply said, I'll give it to you on the road. And I accepted that. And about a few days, maybe about 3-4 days before I left UK to come here, I was praying before dawn, and I received the two chapters of Genesis 18 and 19. And I felt the Lord was leading me to read through them, and I did that. And after reading through them, the Spirit of the Lord just said to me, intercede through those verses for America. And that's you remember when the angels came to visit Abraham and ate with him, and then they talked about Sodom and Gomorrah, and Abraham stood before God and interceded for Sodom and Gomorrah. Then the next chapter, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. I came to Chicago, and the very first night I got here, I went straight to the conference, which was a blessing. I came back and got on my knees to pray before going to bed. And I did everything I knew how to do, but I didn't break through into God's presence. And I went to bed. The next morning I woke up and got into prayer. And I prayed and prayed, but did not break into the presence of the Lord. And I thought, that's odd. I went to the conference. In the evening, we prayed together. I was staying in the same room with a Kenyan pastor. And we prayed together. Again, I didn't feel that I broke through into the presence of God. And for me, that was a cause for alarm, because I'd not spent that long without breaking into His presence for many, many years. And I thought, Lord, something must be very wrong. And very early in the morning when I woke up, I said, Lord, I'm not going to the conference. I'm going to stay here and deal with whatever is the issue with my life. Maybe I opened up to the enemy somehow, and I feel I'm closed out. So the next morning, I just stayed the whole morning before God. And around 11, the Spirit of the Lord spoke to me and said, it's not about you. It's about the land. It's the land where you are. And said, there are layers and layers and layers of darkness covering this land. And this darkness is like a veil separating my people from my presence and hindering their prayers and quenching the spirit of prayer in my people, quenching faith in my people, quenching zeal, and just putting them as low as it can push them. And it says, this is the kind of suffocating environment the church was operating in. That gave me more burden. I stayed the whole day just praying and interceding. And I got all sorts of things in my spirit. But when I left Chicago and went to Oklahoma, my burden increased because I came to the fellowship of my friends, their pastor friends, and they had been such a blessing to us, a big, big, big blessing to us in Uganda, both prophetically and also in ministry. God used them powerfully. And yet coming to their fellowship, there was such a hold over the fellowship. You felt you could not operate in any way. Any effort really to pray down the presence of God, and it just was in vain. And that led me even further into prayer. I remember when I went back, the first thing everybody told me is, haven't you been eating? Because I went back much lighter than when I came in. Because for many days I just couldn't eat. And one day when I was praying, I saw a vision before me. And in this vision, I saw a pillar. It was a pillar made of white clay. And it was like china clay. And around it were flowers of the blue flowers molded into the pillar. It was about 1 meter high. It was just before me. And on top of the pillar, about this size, was a plate, brown plate. And on top of the plate was a beautiful, beautiful cake, white and round and with a lot of decorations. And I marveled at the beauty. But as I looked at it, it started moving away from me. And the further it went, the bigger it became, until the pillar turned into a very high hill, and the cake turned into a city on top of the hill. And then out of the city came light and sent a big glow in the sky. It was so beautiful, so beautiful. And as I marveled and looked on, I heard the Spirit of the Lord say, that is the destiny of this land, to be a city set on a hill, a light in the darkness, and a messenger of my word. And then I saw the picture come back. And as it came back, it reduced back into size and was again a pillar, a plate, and a cake. But this time the pillar had cracks. And I can't explain why, but panic gripped me. And I felt, oh my God, it's going to break. And as I spoke it, the voice spoke behind me again and said, I'm looking for a man who will stand before me on behalf of this land, but I found none. And then the cracks really became big, and I could see darkness inside the pillar. And I began to scream, it's going to break, it's going to break. It's like I thought somebody should come and hold it. And as I screamed, the pillar broke. And when it broke, the plate fell and broke into 2 pieces. One piece fell this way, the other piece fell that way. And the cake just fell in the middle and just broke into very, very, very small pieces. The light, which was in the city, which was still around the cake, stayed in the air for a moment. It was there as a big glow, and then it went on dying and dying and dying away until everything was darkness. And when the vision disappeared, I found my whole body was trembling. Tears were flowing over tears were flowing, and I was really weeping. And I began to pray like a little baby weeping. And I said, Lord, what is the meaning of this? The Spirit of the Lord said to me, the foundations of this nation are being broken one after another. One after another, every foundation is being broken. And I'm looking for a man who will stand before me on behalf of this land, that I may not destroy it, that I may not give back to it as it has walked before me. And I cried and said, but Lord, America is a land full of so many big ministries. Ministries of big names and people who are reaching out to the rest of the world and coordinating prayer and prayer of this sort and prayer of that sort and bringing the nations in coordination. How can you say, Lord, that there's no prayer, not enough prayer here? And the Lord said to me, the cry of sin in the land is louder than the cry of prayer. And a few other details that went with it. I felt sick after that. The following day, I couldn't go out of my room. I just stayed in for a few days. And as I continued to pray, one day I was really pleading and pleading and pleading and saying, Lord, this is not the last word you have for America. I want to hear your heart for America. And then one time I was praying, and in the middle of my prayers, as I was pleading like this, the Lord began to speak to me and said, the cloud of judgment is hanging over this land. And 3 waves of judgment are going to hit this land. One will be a judgment against the spirit of mammon. It says, because my people have made money a god in my place. And I've turned everything to rotate around money, and have replaced me with the spirit of mammon. It says, I'm going to hit at their financial foundations, and everything will come tumbling down. It will not only touch this land of America, it will pull down the economies of many, many other countries. They'll come tumbling. It says, when you speak out to my people, not only here, but everywhere you go. Turn your eyes away from the perishables and fix them on that which is everlasting. It says, tell my people to fix their faith in me. When things fall apart, they will stay standing. It says the second wave will come and hit this land to be a judgment against human pride in human achievements. What man has built, what man has done, what man has been able to put together and because of that, he thinks he can be God. He can replace God in his lifestyle, and he can choose what is good for him and what is bad for him. And he can set his own standards. And says the judgment upon that is going to come in natural calamities. It is going to come by natural means which will hit at the civilization of man, and again will hit, and the time will come when it will get so intense, whole cities will be razed to the ground in a matter of days. So the third one is a judgment against the liberties that overthrow my statutes and standards. In the name of rights and freedoms, my people have rejected my standards, and have chosen to institute their own standards for themselves. It says, at this moment, my hand is holding back the consequences of their choices. But the day is coming when I will lift my hand and allow the flood of the consequences of the choices they've made to come fully flooding over the land. And at that time, there will be a cry for help, but help will not be near. And that was that. And again I was crying, Lord, is this your heart for America? I know you've got something that is redemptive for this land. Everything I'd heard since I'd come in was negative. The next day I was supposed to speak in a church in Oklahoma, in Tulsa. And I went, and I didn't have anything else to say but to share the experiences I'd been going through in the past few days. And the presence of the Lord was so heavy, and as I spoke, there was such vivid detail coming out, and at a certain point, everybody just broke down and they began crying, and the crying eventually rose into wailing, and I couldn't go on. I had to stop. And we all went down on our faces and cried and cried and cried. And the crying was getting more worked up. And I thought, Lord, let this be true brokenness. Let this pull the people through. And immediately the Lord spoke to me. He says, it's not in brokenness that they are crying. It's in anger. How can God be so unjust to do that to us? How can a loving God do such a thing to us? It's in anger, it's in unbelief, and it's in total rejection. And that broke me. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to pray about that. When I went back to my room that night, we actually got a misunderstanding with my hosts because they wanted me to eat. I hadn't been eating for some days, and I just didn't have the heart to eat. And I had a little argument. But I went back to the room, sat down on the floor. It was a bit cold. I mean, it wasn't cold, but I just felt I was so lonely. I put a blanket around me, and I sat with my legs curled up and began to just weep. And I said, Lord, I just ask one thing. I want to know, what's your heart? What's the last word you have for America? And it took a long time. It didn't come immediately. But with time he said, pray that the remnant will be big and strong, and that they will not fear to stand, and they will have the faith to claim this nation back. My purposes for this nation are yet unfulfilled. I'm not through with this land, but I want people who will stand before me on behalf of this land.